蛙艇訓練係需要教練嘅。喺始創初期，教練發展係點樣發展開嚟嘅呢？
We had a couple of coaches out from the UK to run the initial coach education courses. One of those, Rosie McLaughlin, was one of the very earliest ones. She is now the chair of the FISA Competitive Rowing Commission, which is quite interesting, and on the FISA Council. But she was one of the early ones. Ken Wooten was another one, and we had a number of coaches come out to establish the beginnings of our coach education course. And we always, among the other things that we always were aware of, is that coaching has to be the centre of all of our rowing. There have to be good coaches, there has to be a good coaching education program, etc.
香港蛙艇代表隊喺呢幾年成績非常之好。Mr. Tanner 可以介紹一下協會始創階段港隊係點樣發展而成嘅呢？
Prior to the Asian Games in 1982, there was essentially no national squad competition around Asia. It was all it was all club based. In 1982, India, Rowing Federation of India, to include rowing in the Asian Games for the first time in Delhi. And Hong Kong sent a team to that. The association had been formed 4 years before, and we had some volunteer coaches from the yacht club, and we formed a team which comprised Hong Kong University and Fire Services rowers. They went to that first Asian Games, and at that Asian Games, the Asian Rowing Federation was formed. From there, it became obvious that we needed to have our own national squad. The next Asian Games, 1986, was in Seoul, 2 years before the Seoul Olympics. But 1 year prior to that, in 1985, Hong Kong hosted the first Asian Rowing Championships. And that became eventually an annual Asian Rowing Championships, and really was the first time that there was a structured international competition within Asia. Attending that championship, Denny Oswald, who was after that the president of FISA, but at that stage was the Secretary General of FISA. He came, and several other FISA people attended as well. So that was the beginning of the national squad. From Asian Games in 1986 in Seoul, our national squad grew from there. The Jubilee Sports Centre, as such, at that stage recruited a national coach with Chris Perry, and he has been our head rowing coach at the SI and our national coach since then.
為咗發展高水平同埋有競爭力嘅蛙艇隊伍，協會發展咗青少年發展計劃，同時亦都同香港體育學院合作進行咗系統化嘅港隊訓練。Mr. Tanner， 你可以介紹一下呢個系統嘅由來嗎？
I think that when the association was first formed, we applied for affiliation to the International Federation, to FISA, and always we had recognised that Hong Kong needed to be competing internationally, firstly at Asian level, but also at world level. And in order to do that, we needed a national squad. We recognised you couldn't do that with club teams. We had the opportunity, being adjacent to the Hong Kong Sports Institute, it was the Jubilee Sports Centre at that time, but to become a sport in the Jubilee Sports Centre. That of course then led us to say, well, how can we develop and produce Hong Kong teams? Important conclusion that we had to have a sound development program at international level to produce really competitive teams internationally. That could only come from the local community, and the focus of the association and its founder members has always been to develop local community rowing. That needs a pyramid. It needs to start from a young age, so school kids, and to develop them right through the development stage to a top level rowers. I think that's been very successful in that our national squad has, I think at the moment, all come up through the youth development program. Unlike other countries where there were well-established there was well-established club rowing, in Hong Kong we had very little at the base. Normally you would have a very wide pyramid with a very big rowing base and coming up to the national level. Here we didn't, so we had to have a top-down approach as well as a bottom-up. And that came through the youth development program, which was a very big program involving school kids, school visits with rowing machines, centre visits, then following on from that and taking kids out into the eventual elite program. And that's what, when it was first established, as you know, when it was first established, it was highly innovative for sports. It was the leading edge within sports touching schools. And I think we used to touch about 20 to 30,000 kids a year in secondary schools with our youth development program.
協會係建基於蛙艇屬會嘅。Mr. Tanner，你對初期屬會嘅建成同埋當今屬會嘅發展有乜嘢嘅評價呢？
We've always had right from the beginning, we had the understanding that if rowing was going to develop fully, it would need to be done on a club basis, that the association could never provide the manpower, the organisation and everything else needed for hundreds and hundreds of rowers, several thousand rowers. So there needed to be an organisational structure to cope with those, and that of course should be a club structure. So the first club outside of the yacht club and the police here was the Lion Rock Rowing Club, which was formed and is still existing today and is still one of our key clubs. But the club basis was the foundation for the future development of rowing. We also managed then to introduce additional universities. Hong Kong University had been the first one, but then other universities came in and they turned into a very critical part of the development of rowing for us. I think our club development has not been as successful as we would like it to have been. I think that we're working on that at the moment, and I think we can improve significantly. But the concept of a club is very much like rowing itself. It's a group of people who have a common interest, and here the common interest is rowing. But it's not just going rowing and then going home. It's being involved in lots of different activities, and I think, Sam, you have organised. You know the issues. Organised things like going hill walking, or going for a barbecue, or going for dinner after you've had a row, and a real feeling of cohesion and cooperation between the members. It's like a family, and once you have that feeling amongst a group of people in forming a club, then you find people will volunteer. You have to have a club captain, you have to have a club treasurer, a secretary, all these things. People who put their time into making that club a success, making that group of people a success, giving them an identity and allowing them to enjoy their activities together. So the feeling of a club, the concept of a club is a very important one.
Mr. Tanner， 你可以算係協會最重要嘅一位義務工作者。喺過去咁多年，你有冇一啲難忘嘅經歷同我哋分享一下？
I guess two pictures stand out in my mind. One picture is when we had the temporary rowing centre and the single pontoon. We used to have a small, what we called a bank tub, a small wooden tub which rowers would sit in on the pontoon and be taught to row. And I remember a picture of David Sorton in the pouring rain on the pontoon teaching people to row, with about 10 people standing around teaching young kids to row in the pouring rain. And that's an abiding memory. I think that is a good indication of all the volunteer time that went into the early stages of the Rowing Association. No one was paid at that stage, and everyone was just doing it on a volunteer basis. The other one I remember, of course, is when we first moved the rowing championship to Sha Tin and decided that we should set up a buoyed course for the championships. For the first 3 or 4 or 5 years, again, we had no funding for it, so a number of volunteers, including John Cheung and Arthur Leung and myself, would take time off work and spend 3 days to go out in a boat and set up the rowing course, and then take it down afterwards. And again, it just demonstrates very, very well the amount of voluntary work that was put into the association, the enthusiasm which people had, the willingness to spend their own time, not for themselves in any way whatsoever, but to put into rowing to benefit all the people who wanted to row, who wanted to compete.
除咗靜水蛙艇訓練之外，近年協會亦都引入咗室內蛙艇同埋海岸蛙艇呢啲嘅活動，得到幾好嘅發展同埋迴響。Mr. Tanner， 你可以介紹一下呢啲發展計劃嘅背景係點樣啊？
We started with flatwater rowing because that was where we had all come from. from flatwater rowing. And even though the Yacht Club had their rowing base at Middle Island, where it was definitely not flat water, but we used flatwater boats. And of course, at Olympic level and Asian Games level, flatwater rowing is the key. So if we were looking at developing future national squads and Hong Kong representation, then flatwater rowing was the way to go. We moved on to indoor rowing because of the limited access to Sha Tin for many people in Hong Kong. So if we want to have more people try rowing, what's the best way to do it? To bring it to them in their schools, bring it to them in their companies, etc. So indoor rowing was the obvious way in which we could expand the activity in rowing, and also use it for talent identification for future youth development program or national squad athletes, and also just to develop it as a competition base on its own. We've then very recently moved on to coastal rowing, and one of our big challenges all the time has been the limited number of venues we have in relation to flatwater rowing. And that at the moment is Sha Tin. I hope in future it will be Kai Tak also. But coastal rowing would give us access to many, many different areas. Anywhere where there is existing access to water, anywhere there's an existing water sports centre, coastal rowing is okay. It doesn't matter if the water's flat or rough. So coastal rowing gives us a wonderful opportunity to expand further.
早年嘅體育訓練活動比起今日當然有好大嘅分別啦。蛙艇要點樣至可以保持到吸引性，令到更加多嘅人可以參與我哋嘅蛙艇活動呢？
Certainly when I came first to Hong Kong and when the association was established, not very many people were thinking about sport. Of course some were, but very few in the community. That's changed very significantly together with the economy of Hong Kong over the many years since, and many kids are interested in sport. Many parents recognise the benefits of sport. There are still challenges with regard to the education system as well, in the education system, but still many parents recognise the benefits of sport. The fact that many more sports are now available means that it's more challenging for rowing to identify and keep kids in the sport. But that's a good thing from Hong Kong's point of view. From the community point of view, the more sport that is available to kids and to young adults, the better it is for the health of the community and everything else. So I see that as a good thing, not a bad thing. From rowing's point of view, of course we need to compete with other sports to attract people into it, but it has to be demand-led. People need to want to come and row. So we need to make our activities popular, we need to make them attractive, we need to make them particularly well organised. I think that the important thing for young children is that they are able to try out many different sports. Lots of kids will like to come and row. Lots of others will want to go and play basketball or go canoeing or go running. They should have the choice, they should have the opportunity. So the main thing in the first instance is to provide a very large foundation level activity so that as many kids as possible can try rowing if they'd like to. Whether they decide to continue or not is another question. We need to continue to renew our programs, redoing our youth development program to bring it up to date. It was as I said, cutting edge when we started it. We need to decide how can we upgrade that? How can we bring it up to current day expectations of kids now? Children now have much different expectations than they did when we started. So all of those things.
Mr. Tanner， 你對未來嘅蛙艇活動發展有乜嘢嘅願景呢？
I think there's lots of potential in Hong Kong. I think that more and more people will want to take part in sports. Hong Kong will have more and more pressure on the available land, and therefore water sports can play a big part in that. I think that if you just look at Sha Tin, the relatively small land area we have for the number of people who that allows to row is very important. Coastal rowing will play a big part of it. As I said, anywhere that there is a water sports centre or access to water, they can have coastal rowing. They can have coastal rowing boats. So I think there's big potential. In the harbour itself, the harbour is a wonderful facility. It's nice for people to stand and walk around the harbour and enjoy looking at it, but it's much more interesting if you can have some activity rowing activity, dragon boat, canoeing, whatever it might be. But I would expect rowing to play a big part of that. And I would expect to see regular rowing activities on the harbour, regular competitions, regular races in coastal boats on the harbour. But not only there, but in many other districts as well. You know, there can be, Sai Kung is an obvious one, but why not Tuen Mun, why not Chuen Wan, why not Tai Po? There can be coastal rowing in all of these areas, and I would hope that we could establish small clubs in many, many new areas. And of course the big one is Kai Tak. For flatwater rowing there, I would envisage that by then there will be a well-established international rowing course, and that there will be training for hundreds of kids, of people every day in the Kai Tak approach channel.